Good afternoon. Distinguished ambassadors and permanent representatives to the Organization of American States, His Excellency Albert Ramding, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Her Excellency Laura Hill, Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States, OAS Permanent Observer members, partners from industry and academia, OAS colleagues, good afternoon. Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. My name is Kim Osborne, and I am the Executive Secretary for Integral Development at the Organization of American States. I am deeply honored to welcome you to our third high-level policy dialogue on the evolving AI landscape. I extend a special welcome to those joining us online from across OAS member states. It's a joy to have you. We have over 205 persons registered for today's event, ranging from governments to academia to industry to students, which speaks to the significance of this issue. I want to especially recognize the presence and leadership of the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, whose commitment to innovation, cooperation, and institutional strengthening provides the foundation for the work we are advancing today. Today, we are joined by an esteemed group of experts who are seized with this issue and who will be engaging with us this afternoon. I welcome first our moderator, Sue J. Liu, welcome, President of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering. Our panelists, Dr. Jose Segovia, Director for Evaluation and Knowledge Management, National Council for Science and Technology and Innovation of Peru, who's joining us from Peru. Thank you for being here. Mr. Franklin Morales, Director of International Technical Cooperation, National Secretariat for Science, Technology and Innovation of Panama, who's also joining us from Capital. Thank you for being here. Ms. Cheryl Miller, Vice President of Digital Policy, United States Council for International Business. Thank you. Dr. Namir Amani, President and CEO, Information Communications Technology Council of Canada, who's joining us also from Canada. Thank you so much for being here. Ms. Courtney Lang, Vice President of Policy, Trust, Data, and Technology, Information Technology Council, the ITI. Thank you so much again for being part of this discussion. And Dr. Curtis B. Charles, who is the former Director of Academic Affairs of the University of the West Indies Five Islands campus in Antigua and Barbuda, and founder of Future Logic AI, who unfortunately had his flight canceled, but has graciously agreed to join us online. Distinguished colleagues, artificial intelligence is reshaping how we produce, learn, govern, and interact. This transformation is accelerating quickly, and its implications are no longer abstract or technical. They are deeply human, institutional, economic, and geopolitical. Our challenge is to understand how the region can move from intention to implementation, from fragmented efforts to coordinated progress. Achieving the right balance between policy and application requires something fundamental. We need an all-of-government approach within the Inter-American system that naturally means an all-of-the-OAS approach. AI touches every mandate area of this organization. It affects education, productivity, justice, cybersecurity, public administration, the future of work, digital inclusion, and development cooperation. No single institution, ministry, government, or department can respond to this challenge alone. And that is why last year at the Hemispheric Meeting of Ministers of Science and Technology, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development played a coordinating role in advancing this vision. The discussion underscored the need for cross-pillar collaboration and highlighted AI as an horizontal priority that requires joint action across the 4 pillars of the OAS: democracy, human rights, security, and integral development. That mandate continues to guide our work today. It also reinforces the unique comparative advantage of the organization under the leadership of the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, the ability to convene, align, and translate technical expertise into meaningful regional action. Within the context of our work in the Inter-American Committee for Science and Technology, we are focused on navigating 3 critical questions that connect policy ambition with practical reality. First, how do we build institutional capacity fast enough to match the speed of the technological challenge and change? Second, how do we ensure that AI adoption is safe, equitable, transparent, and anchored in our democratic values? And third, how can cooperation across the Americas help level the playing field for smaller states and create shared opportunities for innovation, competitiveness, and importantly, leaves no one behind? Our goal at the end and our purpose for today's discussion is not only to explore these questions, but to identify concrete pathways for cooperation and to position the OAS as a catalyst for responsible region-wide action. I thank our panelists for bringing their leadership and experiences to this dialogue. We all look forward to a vibrant conversation that brings us closer to a coordinated hemispheric approach to AI, one that strengthens our institutions, empowers our people, and prepares our region for a future that is already here. To open this dialogue, it is my distinct honor to welcome our Secretary General, His Excellency Albert Ramdin. Secretary General, welcome to the podium.
Good afternoon. Let me first of all greet our distinguished permanent representatives to the Organization of American States, distinguished ambassadors. I'm not sure if we have the permanent observers present, but if so, also equally welcome. The experts in the panel on the stage already, patiently waiting to share their views. Thank you very much for your willingness to engage. Colleagues from the diplomatic, scientific, and technology community in Washington, D.C. and across the Americas online. Ladies and gentlemen, our own staff of the Organization of American States, the Secretariat. First of all, welcome to the House of the Americas. As we all are aware, artificial intelligence and generative AI development are creating profound transformations in today's world, in our societies. The impact on politics, governance, policy, economics, through business, science, and medicine, education, and core norms and values of our societies are profound. AI and the technologies behind neural networks and AI models impact all 4 fundamental pillars of this organization: integral development, democracy, human rights, and multidimensional security. Like many rapidly evolving technologies, it will be up to us, humans in the first place, and policy drivers to ensure that we generate more positive, than negative outcomes and benefits for our future generations. And I know this has been a philosophical and ethical debate. When other technologies came into play, in this case, we will need to seriously pay attention that the benefits are more than the negatives. The program today is part of the efforts of the Secretariat for Integral Development to respond to the mandates of member states in the declaration of the 7th meeting of Ministers of Science and Technology adopted in December 2024 to facilitate dialogue among all key stakeholders. And I quote, to ensure the pertinence, applicability, and collaborative development of model AI governance and institutional frameworks which respond to the needs and reality of society, markets, and innovation priorities in the Americas, end of quote. So therefore, this roundtable offers a space for member states to engage in critical reflection on current and emerging policy frameworks and strategies for public-private partnerships. The discussion will focus on advancing innovation, leveraging impactful applications across sectors, and strengthening regional cooperation to guide governance approaches in the Americas. One of the current challenges, ladies and gentlemen, for policymakers in OAS member states is balancing a pro-innovation environment with sound governance frameworks. The OAS is committed to advance dialogue and action to make sure we support the effective adoption of AI in the way that strengthens the OAS mission, the OAS pillars to build peace and shared prosperity for all in the Americas. The call for action is to work together in unity as a region. Dialogue and cooperation among member states and between government officials, industry leaders, the private sector, and civil society organizations is fundamental to ensure that collaborative development of AI governance, adoption, and application for progress and prosperity takes place. To be successful, we all need to advance on all fronts and with a multi-OAS pillar perspective. Leaders in the Americas need to invest political will and financial resources to make sure that the current technological crossroads lead to progress and do not instead widen digital and economic divides and inequalities. The impact, as we understand it today, will be significant. Recent studies and initiatives have already identified some major sectors that will be impacted by the developing AI ecosystem, from infrastructural to public governance. The workforce is another area on which the impact is expected to be significant, not only from the vantage point of required skills and competencies from the workforce to provide up and coming services and needs, but also when the workforce is required to adapt to AI on the work floor. New approaches and learning by doing, changing our educational system by doing, will drive the next phase of upskilling and reskilling, which in many countries is a challenge even without the digital divide. So as you see, a lot of work still to be done. Another reality is the fact that research and development initiatives are mainly in the hands of the four spearheaders of the technological era. Latin America and Caribbean nations have a low level of investment in innovation in this space that is, in my view, an unfortunate fact. Collaboration is thus critical to strengthen regional research and development networks, share knowledge, data, and innovation infrastructure to accelerate technological progress. I'm glad to acknowledge that several OAS member states are developing policies, strategies, and enabling networks and frameworks for artificial intelligence. In this dialogue, we will hear about the AI strategies of Panama, Peru, Canada, and the United States Action Plan. Other countries such as Chile, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, and Costa Rica have started AI task forces, plans, bills, or commissions to define how best to deploy AI technologies in their economies and societies. And I'm very pleased to see that so many countries already understanding, recognizing, and investing in this process. But it will have to exponentially grow to make sure that we don't lag behind. Our organization, the Organization of American States, is committed to continue bringing all key leaders to the table to discuss policies and institutional frameworks for the deployment of AI, facilitate the sharing of use cases and good practices of successful AI deployment, public, private, cross-sector, and to set in motion regional cooperation initiatives and public-private partnerships to harness AI for integral development in the Americas, for prosperity for all. The OAS will continue to work on advancing cooperation and collaboration among member states. As part of the Committee on Science and Technology, COMSIT, we support 2 working groups on artificial intelligence, policy frameworks, and regional cooperation on AI with the leadership of governments in cooperation with the private sector and academia. The OAS Youth Academy on Transformative Technologies keeps providing training and certification on AI with the support of leading private sector partners to more than 38,000 of our citizens registered in the platform on transformative technologies. The 7 OAS Centers of Excellence on AI and other transformative technologies provide strategic data, research, and resources to inform decision-making in our hemisphere. Technology foresight is critical for our countries to understand the impact and opportunities of AI through shared expertise and resources. So, in closing, I want to remind ourselves that the focus should not only be in the technology, but on its impact on people and communities. It must be human-driven. We must account for the respect of the human and fundamental rights of all our citizens. We must make sure that AI doesn't widen the gap of inequality in our societies, which is already existing when it comes to the digital divide. The OAS is committed to actions that ensure that AI development, deployment, and governance are conducted in a manner that fosters innovation, protects human rights, advances democratic values, and supports peace and prosperity in our Americas. I want to thank the Secretariat for organizing the 3rd dialogue. I want to wish the panel lots of wisdom in giving us more ideas on how to deal with these challenges. And I want all of you as participants to take home the advice, and especially member states, to invest much more in this area. It's something which will come, whether we like it or not, but it will be there, and we better prepare. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Ramdeen, for reaffirming the OAS's commitment to it and for emphasizing the people-centered approach that is very much needed as we move forward with the adoption of this technology. It is now my pleasure to welcome our moderator for today's session, Sue J. Liu. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary Osborne, and also Secretary General Ramdeen, for your kind welcome and opening remarks to set the stage for our discussion this afternoon. I would also like to add my thanks and appreciation to all the dignitaries here and colleagues at the Organization of American States and guests who have gathered here in the Hall of the Americas and also online for joining us for this event today. It's an honor for me to help kick off a conversation on a topic that touches upon the essence of engineering, which is to advance technology for the benefit of all humanity. Around the world, generative AI tools are rapidly being adopted for applications at home, across all work sectors, and in government with transformative impact. The Latin America and Caribbean region accounts for over 15% of generative AI app downloads, but it only captures 1% of AI investments. Therefore, this region is projected to reap a disproportionately small percentage of the global economic benefits of AI. This mismatch signals that governance should be aligned with growth strategy, not merely a rule book. It's also how we can translate interest into inclusion to avoid the next digital divide. My goal as moderator today is to elicit insights from our panelists to help governments, to help industry, academia, and civil society to move quickly from principles to practice. I hope each panelist will do two things: share one policy or institutional lever from their sector that demonstrably speeds high-value AI uses while strengthening trust. And second, to offer one opportunity for us to facilitate cooperation and collaboration, to catalyze that collaboration to accelerate progress equitably over the next 12 months. So I'd like to thank the panelists in advance for their generosity in sharing with us their learnings and experiences for the benefit of all our countries. Together, we can help to make AI in the Americas a story not only of rapid technology adoption, but also of inclusive technology advancement, with governance as a catalyst for equitable progress. With that, let's dive in. I would like to give each panelist an opportunity to start with an opening statement to share their perspective on the state of AI development and application, as well as the key governance challenges and opportunities shaping the responsible and safe development of AI in the Americas and globally. So we'd like to start with Cheryl Miller, Vice President for Digital Policy of the United States Council for International Business.
Thank you. My name is Cheryl Miller, and I'm Vice President for Digital Policy at USCIB, the U.S. Council for International Business. I want to thank the OAS dignitaries and guests for this opportunity to present the business perspective on the evolving AI governance landscape. It truly is an honor to be here today. USCIB is a business organization with official affiliate status to multilateral decision makers like the OECD, the ILO, the United Nations. We represent U.S. business, primarily Fortune 500 companies all across every industry sector. We give our member companies direct access to participate in policy negotiations with international policymakers and regulatory authorities that will develop rules and standards. USCIB's work around AI has taken place at the UN, the OECD, the ITU, the Internet Governance Forum, APEC, and the B20. We were active in the Global Digital Compact's AI consultations, provided direct input on AI governance at the first AI Ministerial this year at APEC 2012 in Korea, and held numerous bilateral meetings with our members and governments to help facilitate strong public-private partnerships on new advanced technology projects. With regard to striking the right balance between AI policy and progress, I would like to highlight a few high-level recommendations. USCIB members underscore the imperative that AI is human-centric in purpose with related accountability mechanisms. We support the OECD's AI principles as they help ground this value-based approach to AI governance. As we continue to shape AI governance, business believes governments should draw from the substantial body of AI-related work in various multilateral forums, such as the OECD. AI should be accountable to people and provide opportunities for user feedback and relevant explanations and appeal. It should also be subject to the appropriate human direction and control. As governments consider legal and regulatory frameworks around AI, these frameworks should reflect the technology architecture for AI to effectively mitigate risk. Requirements need to be applied not just to those developing high-risk systems, but also to those deploying and using them. AI governance should be transparent and easily explainable. AI developers should commit to responsible disclosures and provide meaningful information and appropriate context to foster a general understanding of AI systems and make users aware of their interactions with AI systems. Risks posed from AI range from threats to personal privacy and system security to the creation of unfair bias. USCIB urges that AI development integrate privacy by design principles into the technology architecture and prioritize scientific research on societal risks posed by AI systems. Governments and the private sector must work together to enhance skills development, employment support, and public-private partnerships in AI. AI skills initiatives that help workers stay ahead of can help workers stay ahead of emerging skills gaps. The benefits realized by preparing the future workforce for the AI transition are magnified through these public-private partnerships. We must also work together to combat misinformation and disinformation. Powerful generative AI tools provide ample benefits and opportunities, but the abuse of these new tools by bad actors through the production and dissemination of deepfake videos, audio, or images for the purpose of committing fraud and sowing societal distrust is a constant threat. Lawmakers and industry must work together with urgency to develop standards and other technical solutions to combat these threats. The global digital ecosystem benefits when government policy makers work in close cooperation with business, civil society, academia, and the technical community. This multi-stakeholder inclusion can lower the risk of unintended consequences and increase the legitimacy of policies that are adopted at all levels. Thank you for the opportunity to share this business perspective, and I look forward to the dialogue ahead.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Next is Jose Luis Segovia, Director for Evaluation and Knowledge Management of the National Council for Science, Technology, and Innovation of Peru.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Mr. General Secretary, Mrs. Executive Secretary, Excellencies, colleagues, receives greetings from the President of CONCITEC, National Council of Science and Technology, Sixto Sanchez. From a perspective, I can comment to you, I am a researcher. I used to make innovative algorithms for machine learning years ago. But in the last 10 years, the AI evolution is changing many things. We are very impressed as a researcher and as a practitioner also. I consider myself different challenges as challenges related to not only to the use, but also how our countries in Latin America can use better and can implement better systems. For that, we need to implement several measures, which I will detail later, but one of them is human resources. The second is how our institutions, organizations could behave with more intelligence. Not only years ago, the paradigm was information processing, how organizations process information fast. Actually, information is a kind of energy, so this is the reason. But now there is intelligence behind. And how can our countries and the organizations, even public or private, could have more intelligence inside? How organizations could have such intelligent properties to serve better to the citizen? And also how the citizens could take better decisions with applications or informations or systems, intelligent systems that they can use in order to have better lives. Of course, there are other related issues in how to do that. But I consider, just to close this first statement, that the reinforcement of human capabilities, not only at the academic level, but also in the social level, are very important to implement such solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose Luis. All right, next we have Franklin Morales, Head of International Cooperation at the National Secretariat for Science, Technology, and Innovation in Panama.
Thank you very much. So part of my job is also leading the AI strategy, the drafting of national strategy for Panama. So it's a work in progress right now. And I think in the process, thinking and reflecting on what's the state of this and the evolution of this technology, there are a few I guess, reflections. One, we're seeing a very distinct pace of adoption in the private sector and the public sector, and that's a big challenge. The private sector is going really fast in this. We have identified some really interesting capabilities already in place in our country when we talk to our private sector partners. And on the other side, in the public sector, is still like picking up adoption, even understanding how can we extract value, how can we provide better services, how does that look like? And then what happens is we need to look into the foundations of where we are, because AI is kind of like the top layer of a long streak of development in terms of digitization of government. So then we need to look back and say, okay, no, we need to go back to the basics. This is not about AI. This is about, do we have digital capabilities at all government levels? Do we have the data architecture, the data governance in place, and how do we move ahead with this? And in the governance space, of course, we're looking at, how can this better service, how can this better improve government, I guess, in terms of what we can provide for citizens, how can we somehow work with the private sector, but that comes with very specific challenges. One challenge is institutional capacity. It's easy to talk about, transparency and unbiased, all this technical thing that when you try to translate into institutional capacity, how does government really ensure this? What kind of technical capacity do we have in place to even think of overseeing some of these things we're talking about? Like when we're talking about bias, for example, are we able to ensure there is not bias in AI systems, considering that most of the data is not going to come from our country, right? It's going to come from somewhere else. So how do you ensure there is not bias there? And then even when you look at the workforce, like who is involved in the designing of this technology, it's like, can we actually ensure there's no bias there? So there are very real policy challenges we're facing. And I think the way we're approaching it as well is like is from the competitiveness side. We're looking at exactly what is the strategy for our country to take advantage of this technology. It's not only about adopting and implementing AI systems in every single problem we have. It's actually, how are we going to participate in this technology? How are we going to create value out of this technology, and how are we going to be competitive moving forward? And then the other challenge that comes in terms of policy in this is it becomes sovereignty, right? AI sovereignty. How do we ensure that if we digitize our education system and our healthcare system, and we integrate AI, that we have the capabilities for surviving an incident? Let's look at pandemics. What happened with PPE, right? Like, you want your country to have the capacity to respond to a pandemic-like incident. How does that look in the digital world? And how does government address that? And then that leads to the conversation of, okay, then we need to work with the private sector. We need to look at incentives. We need to look at how are we actually ensuring this. We are providing what's needed for this ecosystem to thrive domestically. And finally, and this is a long conversation. I think whoever says, we got it figured out, probably they are lying. It's more questions than answers, really. Every single conversation we have around strategy is just a new question, and we're struggling with it and wrestling with it. And we have settled with the idea of saying, well, this needs to be flexible enough that we don't say, like, hey, we're going to do A, B, C, and then D, but we just say, hey, we're going to go to D, and then maybe today is A, maybe tomorrow we know A is not the thing. We're going to do C first. So that's kind of the way we're approaching it, because and then the final block of this is financial, right? It's like, who is going to invest for this? How are we going to get the funds for this? I was in San Francisco just a couple weeks ago talking to an executive of a large AI company, and say, like, okay, how do you quantify what the investment the country should make in terms of adoption, in terms of getting ready in this technology. And the answer was, how much do you have? Right? And as much as you have, probably you need more. So I think for governments, the challenges are multiple. How do we ensure value for the citizen? How do we ensure this is actually making government more effective and kind of generating the resources necessary for adopting some of these policies? And then finally, how do we ensure that as we talk about AI, we're all actually setting up the foundations of how we're going to compete in the AI era? We partner with Georgia Tech, and I'll talk about that a bit later, but something that Georgia Tech tells us in the partnership is the future of X is AI plus X. And that's interesting when you think about it, because we're not talking about like, oh, AI in logistics. No, we're just talking about logistics. Logistics is going to change. And it's going to change enabled by AI. What are you going to do in a world where logistics doesn't mean logistics today, but it means logistics and AI? Are you ready for that? Banking is going to be banking and AI, and we're going to be talking about banking. We're not going to be talking about AI, nothing. It's just banking, and that's the way things are. So for us, where we have those critical and strong economic sectors, we're looking at exactly how do we adapt in this world and how do we compete so it is not only about implementing technology, but actually participating in technology.
Thank you so much, Franklin. Next is Courtney Lang, Vice President for Policy, Trust, Data, and Technology at the Information Technology Industry Council.
Great, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today. As mentioned, I am from the Information Technology Industry Council. Very briefly, for those of you that are not familiar with the organization, we are a global technology trade association that represents 80 technology member companies from across the ecosystem. All of our companies are leveraging or developing AI in some way, and what's really unique about our membership is that we represent companies that exist at every layer of the AI stack, so ranging from semiconductor companies to developers of AI models, generative AI models, all the way through to deployers of AI technology. So we really come to this conversation with that full stack perspective. We are also, as I noted, a global organization, so not only are we engaged in policy development and advocacy in the United States, but we are also engaged in conversations taking place in the European Union, in Latin America, of course, in Canada, in other places around the world, like in the Asia Pacific. So we really bring a global view to the conversation as well. Just a couple of things to highlight at the outset. I will save some of my more specific recommendations for the conversation. But we're about 3 years out now from the release of ChatGPT, and I think that was really the moment where we saw kind of things explode in the AI conversation. There was so much attention that was now placed on this new technology. 3 years out, at least in the US, we're already seeing about half the population say that they either use generative AI daily or that they are at least experimenting with it in some way. Much of this is focused on either enhancing existing work or making processes that they're already doing more efficient. But I do think that's a really interesting statistic, at least from the US perspective, and I do think that will only continue to grow moving forward. The other thing that I would note about kind of where we are in the technological development is specific to agentic AI. We are already kind of seeing the next evolution of generative AI technology, where there are now systems that companies are working on building or are already incorporating into different use cases that move beyond kind of the chatbot-focused generative AI, but are instead built upon those large language models, but ultimately can also in certain instances, depending on how autonomous they are, make a decision, use reasoning, and then choose tools to execute on that decision for a user. And so we're already seeing kind of the evolution of this technology in a really interesting way, and several of our companies are already integrating it into various business use cases. Cybersecurity is a really interesting and great one that we're seeing a lot of potential in, as well as in some of the industrial manufacturing spaces. I'll also note, and I think this has come through in some of the panelists' remarks thus far, that I think we've seen a real shift in the global policy conversation over the last year or so, where there was a really big emphasis for some time on the need to regulate AI, on the need to make sure that approaches were very focused on AI safety and responsibility, and that's still a really important component of the conversation. But I will say, over the last year, we have really seen governments focusing quite a lot more on how they can leverage the technology for economic growth, what sorts of steps they need to be taking. I think you mentioned sovereign AI, but to really build out the infrastructure that they need to support the deployment of AI technology in their countries, and really how it can be used as a force for growth. And so I think public trust is a part of that. Governance is absolutely a key part of that. But I do think it's kind of interesting to note this shift in the overall global conversation. And then I will highlight 2 governance challenges really briefly, and then happy to talk more about this during the conversation. Like I said, folks are still focused on governance and how to approach governance and risk management of AI systems. I think 2 of the biggest challenges that we are seeing right now is kind of one, this focus on how you appropriately address different types of risks. One is more related to risk in deployment context, so how do you protect individual rights? What is the right framework or approach to do that? And then there's this other emerging conversation around the most advanced AI models and systems, and this notion of what some are now calling catastrophic risks. So how do you manage risk related to the development of those sorts of models? And in some cases, you are seeing a regulatory approach that tries to capture all of those things. In other places, you are seeing kind of a differentiated approach. And so that's something where I think we'll continue to see some challenge, particularly around how you evaluate models to see whether they meet a certain threshold, things of that nature. And the second one I would just discuss in that context is also around kind of the distribution of responsibility and liability. And I think there's still quite a lot of challenge in figuring out who all of the players in the AI ecosystem are, what they're doing, what their role is, what they have control over, and then how you appropriately allocate in a proportionate framework the responsibility to those players to make sure that the people that actually have the ability to make changes or do the things that need to be done have the ability to do that. So I think those are 2 areas where we will continue to see policymakers, talk about and think through, and how do we kind of get that right. And that's something that I think will be really important to engage with stakeholders on moving forward. I will stop there and look forward to other questions in the conversation.
Thank you very much, Courtney. Next is Namir Anani, who's President and CEO of Information and Communications Technology Council of Canada.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction, and it's good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly my sincere pleasure to be here today to dialogue and exchange on this subject of interest to all of us, and that is the evolution of AI governance landscape. And it comes at actually a very critical time, because when you think about the discussion on generative AI, as mentioned, almost 3 years ago, it hasn't been in the making. The world has shifted quite drastically in the last number of months, let's say, with the vertiginous growth of AI, with the advent of agentic AI. Now, agentic AI, as was mentioned, is that systems or tools that are able to think, adapt, reason, but also make autonomous actions. So a whole step beyond generative AI and the concept. So governance becomes a much more complex and a much more important thing to discuss. At a high level, we are a National Center of Expertise for the Digital Economy in Canada, with the aim of advancing Canada's digital advantage in a global context. We do a lot of research policy on technology, attraction of investment, IP, and many others, but also we do capacity building. We help Canadians acquire the skills for today and tomorrow, but also help companies adopt technologies and enhance their competitiveness factor. And we work nationally, we work internationally. We just actually published a paper with an organization in Europe called ADRA that works with the European Commission. It's Artificial Intelligence Data Robotics Association. And the paper is called AI Governance and Economic Growth. Please have a look at it on our site or ask me and I'm happy to send you more information. My remarks are really in setting the the state of the environment that we're in. And I think it's fair to say that we stand at a pivotal moment of human history in the way that AI has no longer is treated as a technological shift, but it's one that is reshaping our economy, society, democratic civic life, and even energy demands, labor markets, and many more. But at the heart of it as well is that if leveraged well, AI has the promise to tackle many of the global challenges that are demanding our full attention, from climate change, food security, cyber threats, health risks, and many, many others on that. What's interesting about this environment is the money flow. The AI economy by 2030 is expected to be about $15.7 trillion economy. Just imagine. To give you an order of magnitude, that's almost 7 times the economy of Canada to be that. But at the same time, it is expected to enhance productivity factor around the world by 3.3%, up to 3.3% per year. And when I talk about that, it's not generative AI only, it's the whole suite of AI, because generative AI is a component of all of that. That means machine learning, robotics, automation, computer vision, large language models, and the list, and agentic AI on this. On the flip side is that it is expected that 375 million workers around the world will require upskilling or have to change occupations. So it gives you the dimension of the opportunities, but also the challenges. And while 75 countries around the world has developed AI strategies and actually developing regulations at the moment, there isn't a single treaty worldwide to govern AI. Obviously, the United Nations Digital Compact and the OECD AI policy go a long way into this, but there isn't one treaty that manages the whole process on this. And that's important because ultimately, in the absence of that, it's very difficult to do trade, because AI is definitely transcends every sector and every economy and doesn't have geographical bounds. So let me close on this statement that I think that, you know, from a governance point of view and control of AI, that the control of AI development, deployment, and governance, frankly now, is just as important as sovereignty over energy and natural resources for any country. So it's certainly a pertinent discussion to have, and I look forward to the exchange and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namir. And finally, we're fortunate to be able to have Dr. Curtis Charles join us remotely. He's the former Director of Academic Affairs of the University of the West Indies, Five Islands Campus, Antigua and Barbuda. He's also the founder of Future Logic AI. Dr. Charles?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me clearly? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me this afternoon. Please allow me to accept all the protocols that went before me. I am delighted that the Caribbean is represented on this panel, and I look forward to sharing some ideas with you. I would start with 2 years ago. Well, first of all, the University of the West Indies Five Island campus is only 5 years old, and I want you to take that in consideration as we go through this process. I was hired coming out from Microsoft to help develop the academic enterprise, and the decision at that point in time was to develop this campus into the Caribbean's first AI campus, which it is right now, 5 years later. Started with 174 students. By July 31st, it was 1,200 students. A lot of that growth was the excitement around artificial intelligence. We were very fortunate to launch the Caribbean's first AI research conference, 2024 as well as 2025. Both conferences, we had about 1,100 participants from about 30 different countries. Keynote speakers from vice presidents of CAF, vice president from Microsoft, Meta, IBM, and we had support from Google and NVIDIA. One of the things that came out of the conference, two things. One, the Caribbean has the capabilities to be a leader in artificial intelligence. How do I know that? Our first conference in 2024 sent out a call for all Caribbean leaders who are in AI, who are making differences in different tech companies. We had 350 people on our campus from different parts of the world who are Caribbean leaders. One of the things that came out of both conference, very, very clear to us, is that we need to take action right now. And that singular action that was identified in 2024 and 2025 is that we need to federate and democratize AI. As Ms. Osborne said earlier, no single government, no single university, company can carry the weight of this transformation alone. But together, we can build something extraordinary. Now imagine the 32 OAS country member states linked within a federated artificial intelligence ecosystem. Each nation connected, learning and innovating in real time. In such a system, when one country advances in precision agriculture, another in disaster forecasting, and another in healthcare analytics, those innovations don't remain isolated. They ripple across the network. Through network effects, progress in one member state instantaneously amplifies every other state through self-learning intelligence. Now imagine that imagine that this is not something that is new. This is something that has been existing, that has been continuing for a while. If we look at what we're doing at Future Logic AI, we are working with partners to bring this federated vision to life using architecture that connects governments and universities and private sector innovators through secure, expandable, and transparent artificial intelligence frameworks. The model doesn't centralize. There's no centralized power in this model. It is decentralized, allowing every nation, large or small, to contribute its benefits. If you look at this federated network, it gives every country within, or every member state, to be able to connect with each other. If you think for a moment that what you're doing in Dominica in ecotourism might be crisscrossing with something that Trinidad is doing in energy, that crisscross, that intersection becomes an emergent. There's a new field that's developed in that way. So if you think about what we're talking about, it's like a web, it's like a mesh that connects all the countries, but the innovation is in the intersections. And what the intersection proves is that it doesn't leave us isolated. We cannot do this alone. So the call to action is clear. Build a federated AI of Americas. Create shared standards, pool research hubs, cross-border data trust, and regional innovation exchanges. In doing so, we will ensure AI in the Americas is not just responsible and safe, but transformative, inclusive, and uniquely ours. The future belongs not to the biggest player, as we have proved at Five Island campus, which is only 1,200 students, but the future belongs to the most connected ones. Not the biggest players, the most connected players. If we act now, the OAS can lead the world in proving that the intelligence of 32 nations, federated, ethical, and open, can achieve far more than any one nation alone. Thank you.
Thank you for those inspiring words, Dr. Charles. We're very happy that you could join us today. All right, so at this point, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to answer the same question, which is, what key policy levers and institutional strategies can governments deploy to accelerate innovation in a safe and responsible way while safeguarding public trust in AI? Let's start with Namir. Thank you.
Yeah, so, maybe start with the innovation and trust. I mean, I think it's, if you look at this environment, I think that one of the most complex questions is how do you strike a balance between innovation and regulation, ultimately. Innovation, whoever worked with the industry, moves faster than regulations, and as a result creates a governance gap. Too little regulation can create societal harm, bias, and also concentration of power. Too much regulations impedes entrepreneurship, deters investments, deters adoption of technology ultimately. In Canada, we looked at this approach, and I will expand on it further on, is that we tried to develop what we call is ADA, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. It did not pass because the government was prorogued because of election under the bill C-27. But in the meantime, we have built a voluntary code of conduct that is built on transparency, accountability, equity, fairness, and many others. And we entice the industry to be part of it as early adopters of this, so that when law through regulation comes in, they're in the know. They have a better idea of doing this capability. But also, part of the pan-Canadian AI strategy, one thing that was quite well done is that we created 3 centers of expertise of AI to strengthen the ecosystem in Canada. One is Vector in Toronto, one is Mila in Quebec, and one is Amy in Alberta. The aim of this is that they have the know-how and the capability and the talent, but also the research agenda to test the grounds of AI. Before we jump into developing AI rules and law, we wanted to understand the landscape of this. What is acceptable, what is not acceptable, how much of the boundaries we push to get us with this, how does bias work or doesn't work, what is transparency looks like, and that gave us a better idea of how to create that environment. But I would stop at many other aspects to entice innovation and responsible adoption. We're spending in Canada a lot of investment into talent development, occupational development to create the technology of the future so that we're not only consumers but creators of this technology. But at the same time, we're working on the demand side, so looking at skills to help citizens and consumers understand the technology better, look at the critical thinking in terms of what works, what doesn't work, but creating that demand, because ultimately, if the supply is there but the demand is not there, we're not creating the right market for AI going forward. And last two is this, we're enticing as well through some of the government mechanisms of access to capital and financing to help companies adopt technology, but also insisting on developing policies that will entice commercialization, because ultimately, if AI does not move from the laboratory, the labs, to farms, to hospitals, to industry, it's not making the impact that it should be. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Namir. It seems like the Canadian government is putting a lot of resources into this, right? So support these research centers and so on and so forth. But let's say other countries might not have as many resources. But as we heard earlier, AI progress in one country will definitely have impact on other countries. So the question I'm just asking to follow up, would the Canadian government be open to sharing the learnings from its investments in these research centers just to help all the countries in the Americas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'd be delighted as an organization to help with that, but we're not a government organization, we're an independent organization. However, the government of Canada is always in support and looking for to expand the reach and capabilities. And the reason I mentioned the notion that there isn't a single national treaty on AI is the timing is right, and hence why I'm here in this discussion and others. I think it may make sense for the coalition of the willings to start to think about this and to put the right guidelines and share the best practice and knowledge mobilization, because that's the one that's going to help us all succeed in a global economy.
Well, thank you. Next, maybe Courtney, would you like to share what you think are the key policy levers and institutional strategies for governments to deploy?
Sure. I will talk a little bit about two sides of the equation here. I think, we just heard that this is a balance, right? So it is really, really important to figure out how to both support innovation while also managing risk and building public trust in the technology. And so, there's a lot of opportunity with AI, and I think, when we talk about AI more generally, something that comes up a lot in the conversation, I will repeat it here, is the really important notion of assessing risk and figuring out where risk is occurring and how to mitigate it. Because depending on what type of risk you're trying to address, one of, I think, the key policy and institutional strategies here is to really focus on taking a risk-based approach if you are in fact thinking about regulating the technology, so that you are addressing risk at the point where it materializes. And in a deployment context, what sorts of obligations you apply might be very different than if you're talking about risk related to some of the more advanced AI models, and that risk might occur further upstream as opposed to downstream. And even in that context, not every generative AI model presents kind of the same level of risk. And so I think one of the tools that is really important to encourage the adoption of across the board, that's both within the government but also outside, is kind of this notion of risk assessment and undertaking a risk assessment to better understand before you are deploying the technology where risk might materialize, and then take steps to mitigate that risk beforehand. We are very, very supportive of the adoption of voluntary frameworks like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. We at ITI, in conjunction with our member companies last year, actually developed something that we call the ITI AI Accountability Framework, and that lays out a series of best practices that we believe are really important for companies to be undertaking in both the development and deployment of AI technology. And so, in there we talk through some of those best practices and what they are. Risk assessment is one of them. Impact assessment is one of them. Transparency is one of them. So there's a lot of different tools that can be used to really foster public trust, and that I think, governments should be encouraging the adoption of. The other thing I'll note is kind of the key role of international standards more broadly. I had the pleasure of joining you all for a conversation last year where I talked about international standards in particular. And for those of you that don't know, ITI also has a standardization arm called Insights. They are the representative for the US Technical Advisory Group to the Subcommittee 42, which develops AI standards, and ISO IEC. And so that plays a really key role as well, right, in facilitating interoperable approaches. I think we were also talking about kind of the need to address fragmentation. If everyone is building and adopting standards both for risk management and more broadly on AI, I think that's a really important tool, again, that governments can be both adopting and encouraging the adoption of in order to foster interoperability. So those are two things that I would mention in terms of the kind of managing risk and building public trust bucket. And then I think on the other side of the equation, in terms of fostering innovation, I think we're hearing from some folks here about national AI strategies, but I think that's such an important component, is really building out what that looks like. How are you going to drive adoption, identifying what some of the challenges are, and then figuring out, where are those opportunities for governments to work either with the private sector or other stakeholders to overcome those challenges. So I really think that having that cohesive strategy is incredibly important as well.
Wonderful. So Courtney, just make sure, do I understand correctly that it's the companies who are developing and adopting AI systems who are responsible for doing the risk assessment and developing standards?
That's correct. So, government's role, right, is to potentially provide oversight or to promote regulatory approaches when necessary, but certainly it would be the companies that are undertaking things like risk and impact assessments that are working to develop international standards, although there are government participants that exist in those bodies as well. And so I think there is a role for government there, but it really should be an industry-driven process.
Next, Franklin, how would you like to share what key policy levers and institutional strategies can governments deploy?
Yeah, thank you. I think actually that intervention is a good segue to what I had to say, because for us at least, the strategy is the foundation. A lot of the work we've been putting into this strategy is how do we ensure that as a society we have a common understanding of what we're trying to do here, where we're going, and that whenever we start this path, we're all together in this. And along the way, also, how do we manage expectations in terms of what can be done, what cannot be done, what's our role, how are we going to play in this field? So throughout the drafting of our national strategy, we've tried to be very participatory, just having multi-stakeholders, workshops, interviews, just getting back. And the thing is, we're saying, well, we don't need to get there fast, but we need to get there right. So for us, it's very important that private sector has a say, that academia has a say, that research has a say. So then moving forward in terms of what we are looking at, what we think is we need, as a government, citizens are concerned. They want to know that their government is taking care of them in terms of their safety, in terms of how this technology is being deployed. So we have had to balance this expectation, and sometimes citizens and even legislators, they equate safety and trust to regulation. So for the Secretariat, part of the landscape we've had to navigate is, okay, how can we respond to the citizens while at the same time keeping our flexibility in terms of how we're moving and how we're adapting to this technology? So something we've been doing is we've been partnering with UN agencies, different UN agencies, and looking into innovative ways to regulate, like sandboxes. How can we share practices with other countries and other regulators? So even though the Secretariat of Science and Technology is not a regulator itself, we have become an articulator of our regulators and saying, hey, we need the banking regulator, the services regulator, the stock exchange regulator, and now we're going to exchange practices with other regulators around the world in terms of how they are mitigating and how they are navigating the deployment of AI technologies, so that each regulator per sector can learn and can adapt, and then also how do we build capacity in those regulators to deploy sandboxes, so that then depending on the experience we have in these sandboxes, we can move on to regulation. Of course, we're also partnering with private sector, law firms, international organizations to also think of if there was regulation. How does that look like? It doesn't mean at the moment we're assessing this path, but we think we need to be prepared for how that looks like, so that we can also have an informed conversation with our citizens in terms of why is this good, why is this not good, and with the private sector as well. I think it's been mentioned also, the research side of it. I think even though it's sometimes seen as something like it's more long-term, I think research in AI safety is important. Something I do, I often get to go to these international spaces, and sometimes you listen to AI talking about AI. I don't know if that makes sense. You go to the United Nations, and 8 out of 10 speeches, you're like, that was written by AI, and we're talking about AI. So somehow, because of consuming AI and using AI to, enable us, this is shaping society. This is impacting society. This is impacting who we are. Do we understand how this is impacting us? I don't think so. And it doesn't go so much to specific safety things, but it's more like what is it going to be of our system, of the democracy as we know it? How is it going to be of our society as we know it? What kind of research are we putting there? So that's important. And the conversation and standards. I think it's important how we share knowledge, and I think you pointed to that. part of the challenge is that we cannot participate in some of these conversations of setting international standards for AI meaningfully because of the lack of knowledge, of technical knowledge. It's a very one-sided conversation. You tell me that's the standard. What can I say? If not, is there anything for me to say there? So it's also among our countries, and I think it's a conversation that we may need to be having, is how are we sharing information so that we can participate more meaningfully in some of these global discussions?
Very thought-provoking. So just to make sure, so you think sandboxes, separate sandboxes should be developed, I guess made available for each industry sector? Because the risks and the benefits might be different? And then can these be shared across countries? It depends.
Like for us, we have very specific, like Panama's economy has very key strategic sectors like finance, logistics, energy, of course. I'm not saying that it needs to be in every single sector, but I think in the most impactful ones, yeah, probably you want to test something before you go with regulation in terms of how this is going to play out. Also, have that opportunity to engage with private sector in terms of what the response is going to be. Because unfortunately, this is not a technology that it's not a technology that we are going to get to set the rules. So we need to see, how are we going to navigate again with the rules that are being set, and then to the extent that it makes it's actually beneficial for our country. And again, I guess the logic is really we cannot institutional capacity to regulate this. It's not there. It's very difficult. So I guess what we're trying to do is let's test what capacity do we need. Let's test what are the skills we need to set up at a government level so that then we can go and respond and say, this is what's possible and this is what makes sense and doesn't hurt us. Rather than going quick and passing some law that then we cannot really even enforce. And it will hurt us in terms of our competitiveness.
That makes sense. Consistent with your earlier comment about the need for government to be flexible in regulating AI and its development. I do have a question, but maybe I'll leave it for Cheryl to answer about how do you ensure that people in government who develop laws and policies are actually knowledgeable enough to do so. But I'm going to let Cheryl try to answer that because that relates to public-private partnerships. But next, I'd like to give Jose the opportunity to answer my first question.
Thank you. I hope we can address this question from three domains, we can say. The first domain is the domain of education. Education at different levels. The government, people who work for the governments, the educators, and also the practitioners, the ones who actually, the computer scientists who actually develop the AI systems. This is very important. Second, how we use the systems, we have to understand that. And third, the international collaboration for the better use or implementation of systems according to our needs. Let me detail these three domains. The first domain is related to how the citizens and the managers and the governmental officers deal with this problem. How they have to learn. Everybody have to learn because this new technology, and I think will be more and more important in the following years. How to order means how to make a new system, but I ask a private company to do some systems for us, or how to use the systems, AI systems within the organizations. It's what I mentioned a while ago too. And it's not only how to use systems, but also how to change the organization itself to become more intelligent, which is still an open question. And second, how do the computer scientists, the ones who want to write the programs to do it according to the general rules of behavior. What do I mean for that? Ethical behavior, in short. I think it is not convenient to have a list of 100 no's. Say no, don't do this, don't do that, or your system should behave that. Or I think we should go back to the basic fundamental of ethics. In the same way that a civil engineer to make a building obey the physics, the law of physics, to calculate, to obeying the gravity laws. I think the ones who make AI systems, as well as everybody, has to obey some ethical basic rules. And I want to go back to the imperative principles of Immanuel Kant. I think these two imperative principles of Immanuel Kant are very important. The first one is whatever we do, we think could become a general rule for everybody to behave. If it's true, you could do it, otherwise not. This is very important. And second is treat the humanity as treat a person with dignity and humanity. It's not only the means, but it's an end at a person. With these rules, not only the one who write a program should behave better, also who want to order the program, who want to ask how this system should behave, how we should behave. For example, right now, we're failing at that. Somebody ask some chat, whatever, and ask a question and who related to history of Bolivia, for example, and they will answer whatever because the system doesn't have the information, but they will answer anyway. They doesn't tell you, I don't know about this system. And this is unfair because how do you know that this system knows something or not? Still, we have much work to do so the systems that we are using or ordering behave accordingly to these fundamental laws of behavior or ethical principles. And second, the international collaboration. I think it's important, and as I mentioned as a minute ago, we use systems who are trained with data from many parts of the world, but not from South America, for example. In that sense, I want to comment a system that they're developing in South America and Chile with collaboration with researchers of Peru, which is LATAM GPT, who is using to train with documents from South America in such a way that once I think the system will be done in next year, at the beginning of the next year, so we can use the system knowing our history, our laws, our news. So we can ask questions about history of Bolivia and not others, but this one. So in that thing, it's important to the international collaboration to get better systems to behave better. But that's it. I think that's important what I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. It was consistent with your opening remarks about the importance of ensuring that AI is human compatible. And it's a good point that there's a need to give access to more information for the AI models to train on. So it's wonderful to know that you're working on that in Peru.
LATAM GPT, they're working, researchers from Tarapacá University in north of Chile and researchers from Peru too. Yes.
Thank you. And finally, Cheryl.
Well, thank you so much. And when we talk about levers, I think the first thing to think about is, well, what's the goal, right? I heard some comments regarding having a plan, and I think having a plan is important. And as you know, earlier this year, the US released their AI action plan. Then we're now going through a new phase where they've put out their request for information on AI exports. So with respect to the tone and the direction of their plan, they have a very positive leaning focus and one that is pro-innovation. And so I think, for example, if a goal is economic growth, I think having a pro-innovation approach is important with respect to having companies want to invest, having different companies want to invest. You don't want just one company to come in, you want it to be competitive one of the reasons why the US is so successful is because we do have such a competitive environment. With respect to finance as well, you want to think about different financing structures, right? Because every country is different, every country has different needs. There might be some financing structures that work better for country A versus country B, and it's a two-way street. In terms of getting finance as well, look at things such as non-tariff barriers. Are there ways that you can kind of entice different companies to come in? Look at, for example, tax incentives, different packages that you could create to provide an environment where companies do want to come in, because as was mentioned earlier, it is extremely expensive. We keep talking about AI, and I hate talking about AI because we start at AI. We forget to talk about the full tech stack. And that goes all the way down. I mean, you have to start with connectivity. If you don't have connectivity, and to have connectivity, you need energy. So there are all of these different layers that we kind of hop, skip, and jump over, and we start talking about let's benefit from AI. When realistically, every country is different, and they do have different resources. In some countries, there are huge swaths where they don't have the right energy capacity yet. And we're even facing challenges here in the US with understanding how are we really going to have the energy to power AI to the extent that we talk about having AI. And so I think that that's important. With respect to the technical community, they absolutely have to be brought in. I think, my message to governments would be, you have a lot of experts in business, you have a lot of experts who are engineers, part of the technical community, academia, this whole, what some of us refer to as the multi-stakeholder community. Bring in everyone around the table, because everyone has a different level of expertise, and if you're all working together, you're just gonna learn from each other, and you'll be stronger that way. With respect to trust, I know Courtney brought up trust, and that is so important. And as she mentioned, the different initiatives that her organization is doing, I think that just signals that trust, the way you build trust is through education. Many times we fear what we don't know. So the more education that you can provide the public with as well is going to just balance and enhance that trust as well. And I think we need to understand that, innovation transforms economies. And technology does move very quickly, as was mentioned earlier in this panel. I think having a balanced approach and really just taking a deep breath and moving forward at a pace that enables flexibility is one that is going to be beneficial for governments in the long run. And I know you had a tag-along question for me with respect to how do you educate governments. I think all of us business associations, our members are always ready to come in and talk to you. They want to partner with you. When you talk about public-private partnerships, they're really energized. I think that they want to work together with you. So opportunities like this discussion, but also reach out to the business associations that are out there and just say, hey, we'd love to bring you in. For example, we'll be talking with folks at NTIA, hopefully in the coming weeks. We have requests from different countries as well, just to come in and have our members talk with them. And we're happy to do that. And at the same time, reach out to civil society, technical community, academia. Civil society is so important because they understand the local level better. These are the different organizations that they're steeped in the conversations around human rights and other things. And so it's important to include them as well and understand that. And so I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. All right, I think just to give our audience members time to answer questions, I'd just like to ask every single one of our panelists to quickly answer this question. Looking ahead 3 to 5 years, what is the single most important action that governments, academia, the private sector, and civil society should take now to ensure that AI drives responsible, safe, and trustworthy innovation, practical progress, and impactful applications across the Americas?
You write very detailed questions. So it's good. I think the two things that I would say would be collaboration and coordination. We have AI governance initiatives happening in many different places. We have the new AI scientific panel, we'll have the global dialogue, we have work at the OECD, et cetera. I think working together to get through all of these different work streams would be important so that we're not conflicting, but we're kind of complementing and moving forward with respect to the different high-level goals. Some of them that I sort of rattled off at the beginning of my speech, those kind of high-level points that I think most governments agree are important and are longer term goals.
Coordination and collaboration, and that's something that OAS is certainly facilitating. Jose Luis?
Yes, I think the main action should be to improve funding for education and STEAM, science and engineering. Also in computer science, which is the basis for AI. In South America, in Latin America, the number of researchers for populations is very uneven. And Peru is in the 7th position, which is, we're not happy with this. We have to improve funding to increase the number of the students and teachers and professors at the universities in different areas of science. I think this is the most important thing we should do.
That's wonderful. And fortunately, AI can also assist teachers and help students learn more effectively. That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Franklin.
I like what the gentleman from the Caribbean said in terms of the future belongs to the most connected. I think from Panama's perspective, we think that the basic is work on the foundations. And that's a broad thing to say because the foundations are infrastructure, connectivity, energy. How can we get that right soon? Data, how can we get that right soon? Talent, how can we get that right? And we can start building that talent. So I would say identify what are the foundations and start working as soon as possible on those because this is just moving faster and faster as it goes.
Hopefully countries can collaborate also on making sure everybody has foundational infrastructure and yeah, good education.
And I think the most connected. Hello? Too much time already? Okay, my time up. I think the connected goes to that as well. It's like how do you connect in terms of partnerships? And each country is going to find a different answer, but it's like how do you fit in the overall scheme of things and how do you partner with others in that?
Okay, this isn't original because I'm echoing what 2 other people have already said, but I do think it's critical, right? We are seeing kind of this uneven readiness, and you mentioned a lot of kind of challenges around institutional adoption and technical capacity within government and more broadly, and I think there is a real need to address that and build those skills so that as AI is being adopted, you have people that are ready to actually leverage the technology and understand how it works. So both with regard to kind of having the appropriate infrastructure in place and figuring out how to build that out and make that work, and then also with regard to upskilling, reskilling, making sure that folks have the technical capabilities that they need to actually deploy and implement AI is important. And then the other side of this is, you know, something that Cheryl already mentioned, but I think is really important and worth foot stomping is just really around the important role that OAS in particular can play in driving coordination, I think, across all of the member states. There are a lot of good international engagements and efforts that are ongoing, but I think really one of the key starting places is kind of understanding what are key terms in taxonomy, how are we describing these things, what do we need to kind of define collectively so that we're all operating from a common place of understanding. And I know that's really basic, but I think it's critical in actually moving the conversation forward in a meaningful way.
That's wonderful. Of course, for effective collaboration and coordination, we need to be able to communicate effectively, and that is where common terminology becomes so important. All right. Namir.
Sorry, yeah. I would echo, I mean, apart from collaboration and others, the 2 aspects for me, I think first is what was talked about, which is the skills and talent developments. Talent is the essence of any high-performing economy. So we have to develop that capability in the next number of years to be able to determine what are the options and capabilities of that technology going forward. But I would go further. I think we have to also, as I mentioned, provide some skills to even as early as in early schooling, to treat AI as important as numeracy and literacy, to develop that AI literacy capabilities, because you can develop laws and voluntary code of conducts on responsible use of AI, but if you don't have the demand, which is the consumers and citizens are able to decipher this, you're not creating that environment going forward. But I think the second one is we have to work collaboratively on knowledge mobilization. A lot of the industry in Canada and the research that we've done in Europe, we found that not many of the industry is adopting the technology to the extent necessary. And we all have to be pro-innovation on that space. The opportunities is just tremendous. But we have to create those centers and share that information of what works and what doesn't work. Because most countries, at least in Canada and many other countries, is that it's the large majority of the industry is micro and small medium enterprises. They don't have the deep pockets to try and do the trial and make it or break it. Ultimately, you need that knowledge mobilization to share that information and help them have the confidence in adopting that technology and move that needle a little bit further in the innovation cycle. Thank you.
It's an excellent point. So I guess this is where governments can play a role, because you need not only resources but also incentives somehow to get these small and medium-sized businesses to adopt new technology for the benefit not only of their own industry but for the country. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we have time, about 15 minutes remaining for members of the audience to ask any of these panelists a question. Please.
If I may add, is it possible to add a point?
Oh, is there somebody online who's asking? Let's first start with a question here on the floor at the microphone. Oh, there's a speaker. Oh, the person online. Oh, wonderful. You're still with us, Dr. Charles.
I'm still with you, yes.
I was told that you would not answer any questions. So please, your turn.
Absolutely, yes. So I just wanted to, first of all, piggyback on one of your questions you asked earlier. It is very, very important that you have this public-private partnership. The first thing I did when I arrived 5 years ago in Antigua was to meet with the government. And what I wanted to do was first win the hearts and minds of the government. If we could do that, then we would get the financial support, and then we will get the support where AI is something that's not seen as a negative, but it's seen as an enabler. So in the last 5 years, the government has been tremendous. I mean, in the point that there isn't as yet AI strategy, which I am very afraid is the wrong approach. Because if you think about the government has to do healthcare, the government has to do tourism. Those things happen either way. One of the things we used to say all the time at MIT was we need to use appropriate technology that are enablers. And I think AI is an enabler, and we had to be very careful when we build these laws and when we have these national strategies that it becomes separate from the activities that you do. And lastly, I would say, on your last question, it has been interesting listening to the conversation, because as a Caribbean man, it is very hard to take my head out of a small island development state. And some of the sizes of the 32 member state of the OAS as well. And when you know the limited resources of developing states, and when you know not only limited in terms of resources, but limited in terms of brain drain to North America, I know in my being that the only way that we could move forward as a region is if we federate. If we have this network that connects us, and we could share knowledge, and we could move forward. Innovation that happened in Antigua gets spread out to everybody else. Innovation that happens in Trinidad gets spread out to everybody else, and the network effects just keeps it going, and the environment just continue learning. I know we can't go this with government separately. So it is important. I think it's an awesome opportunity for the OAS to embrace this concept and network and federate your member states so that everybody move forward together. Because it's very possible that we could leave a lot of nations behind, and that will be awful. I think what we need to do, when I arrived 5 years ago at Five Islands, I said that we need to creolize the technology. When I mean creolize, I mean that we need to make this technology ours and relevant for our region so that it would not be irrelevant. So somebody selling sugar cake by the savannah could know that they could be part of this environment. Somebody in a restaurant know that they could be part of this environment. So everybody lift to the top. And I think that we stand a great chance in the Caribbean and the Americas for us being left behind because we are trying to do this alone. We got to collaborate. We got to network. We got to federalize, and we got to democratize artificial intelligence within our small island development states, the Americas and the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Certainly, federated AI would certainly ensure equitable progress. All right, thanks so much again, Dr. Charles. Okay, we have some questions here. Please proceed.
Audio, there we go. Hello, thank you to all the speakers and presenters. My name is Jorge Duran from the Inter-American Committee on Ports. As ports in Latin America and the Caribbean begin to digitalize operations, how would you advise them to best use artificial intelligence, especially considering big data? Now we have too much information on every container, on every ship, on every cargo, on every client, on every producer, on every trailer that comes into the port. There's too much information. And European and American and Canadian ports have used AI in a particular way that suits their level of development. My question specifically, perhaps Franklin, Dr. Charles, the representative from Peru, but also Canada and the States, might have an idea.
No. Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. I will try to answer the questions. It's very important, very interesting, because Peru also is involving in enhancing the infrastructure in that area. One important thing is how to share the data, because you may say you have a lot of data, but how to share efficiently the data. It has to be stored in public spaces, obviously with many taking care of the privacy issues well, but has to be implemented in such a way that even machines or humans could read this data and use it for research or also for develop new applications. Companies could use the data to make several applications. So I think the most important thing is to share the data efficiently. I can't go with the technical terms, but this is the way one way I can tell you. And also communicate to all the partners, not only the main companies, but also the small ones, how to use this information, this data to make AI systems with that.
Testing? Oh, thank you very much, Jose Luis, for answering that question. I actually served as a professor for almost 30 years in California at the University of California, Berkeley. My answer would be enlist some students or faculty in your countries to help with this problem. You know, they love to solve problems. They can help you figure out how best to organize the data and to derive some insights and to optimize the use of AI. So that would be my suggestion. Just enlist the talent in the LAC countries to help solve the problem for your industry.
So first of all, thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear all the discussions. I'm Luciana Valadares. I currently serve as a faculty member at Georgetown University, teaching artificial intelligence and human rights in Latin America. And one of the panelists mentioned the lack of an universal treaty on AI as a possible barrier. And looking at the UN so we see that they have been doing a lot on discussing, but no legally binding instrument. We have the recommendation on the ethics of AI from one of the UN agencies. We see that at the Council of Europe has the Framework Convention on AI. And my question is if you have any reflections on the possible value added or the challenges of this as well, of a regional legally binding instrument or even soft law instrument to foster balance between innovation and protection of human rights for like regional agreements coming from regional organizations such as OAS or Asian or the African Union.
Can you? Oh, wow, yeah, it's good. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think an international treaty is an important one to do that. But I would encourage that you don't have to wait for this. In Canada, although we're trying to develop the ADA, the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, but we put in place a voluntary code of conduct to help create the bridge towards regulation in the future. I would encourage any country that is looking at, do we wait for this national treaty or what's developing elsewhere, is that there are countries that have developed voluntary code of conduct. I mean, the US, us, many others are in that space. It's true that you can take also advantage of what's happening in other countries. Europe, for instance, have gone into very much risk-based regulation of what is acceptable, not acceptable, limited, and actually define that quite well. The importance of this, in terms of clarity, is that capital is mobile. If there's no certainty in the marketplace, that will move somewhere else. So you have to have certain regulations, or at least some reference of regulations, to attract investment, foreign direct investment, because businesses don't invest if it's not clear. I'll stop there.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful panel. I enjoyed a lot of the insights. My name is Andrew Vanjani. I'm the CIO for the Organization of American States. I'm wondering if I can ask a question to each one of you. Maybe briefly you can answer that. I know you're laughing, but I think it will be important. I heard panelists from Canada talk about how Canada doesn't want to be only consumers, they want to be creators. There are lots of different reasons why countries in the hemisphere want to invest and implement AI governance, especially at the governance level. Brazil wants full sovereignty, for example. Some countries are okay being consumers. And given the diverse emerging AI initiatives that governments are bringing in the Americas, there's a lot that will require to create something that's a one, fit-all strategy. So wondering if each one of you can help us here understand what could the OAS do? What concrete initiatives the OAS could prioritize, say, within the next 3-5 years to help the hemisphere?
Okay, I'm going to ask the people who haven't yet been answered a question to go first, and then the others if they would like to answer. So starting with Courtney.
That's a hard question because I think there's, I know that you already have quite a lot of ongoing work streams, so I don't want to suggest duplication of things that are already happening. I mean, like I said before, I do think that there is something to be said for really aligning around common definitions and taxonomy. So I do think if that's not something that's already going on, that could be a concrete initial step. I also think that, you know, there is a real opportunity for the Americas to be a leader on some of the governance conversations. And sure, we have an approach that Europe has taken around the AI Act, but that doesn't have to be the only regulatory model out there. And so to the extent that there are governments that are thinking through what is the right approach to governance and regulation, there is an opportunity to, I think, bring forward perhaps a model that is a little bit different, that might still address concerns of citizens and others, help to build trust in the technology, that maybe takes a slightly different approach. So perhaps an effort aimed at figuring out, you know, what are those practices and how do we want to kind of make sure that they're consistently applied across the group of member states could be a helpful tool as well.
A concept we've been advancing in Panama is this concept of science diplomacy, how we need to address some of these global challenges together. I think I was discussing the challenge that we're facing, at least conceptually, in saying, hey, we're going to put AI in this critical, you know, health, education, energy. And what does that mean for sovereignty, I think goes to part of the conversation. I think there's a space for governments to come together and say, can we set up a capacity for our countries to access to compute, to access to processing power in a framework that is trustworthy, that we feel is neutral, that somehow I think it's a massive conversation, and I'm not saying it's easy, but there are examples. CERN in Switzerland is one of those large infrastructures that the world came together and said, hey, maybe we can do something together in this space. And I think in the AI world, in the AI future, I guess, there is this space for countries to say, hey, we need to access compute power, infrastructure in a neutral platform that we all agree to. Can we have that conversation? What would it take? What's the investment? And what's the governance? I think that's a conversation that I think would be very valuable. We've been pondering how to even enable that conversation, but we think it's an important one to have.
Thanks, Franklin. Cheryl, sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's a great question. I'm a big fan of case studies, and I think the problem with case studies sometimes is that information, it's hard to keep it updated and understand, you know, what the landscape truly looks like. Again, to the point that was made, I don't know all of the different work streams that the OAS has ongoing, but I think anything building case studies around what's working and what's not is important. With respect to finance, any way where we can come together and collaborate on that is a good thing. I would point you to the ITU Secretary General, Doreen Bogdan-Martin. She has launched what's called the Partners to Connect program, where they're listing all the different projects that different companies, countries, organizations are doing globally. I think that's really helpful just to see not only where the money is going, but what's it going towards? Is it going to skills? And if all the money is going to skills, then do we need to put more towards infrastructure? But those two, and having more conversations like this, actually, and making sure that we do include the full community. You know, having a business representative, having someone from technical community, having someone from academia, civil society, I think is very important.
Okay, briefly, I can suggest a project to implement AI assistance with all the corpus documents of AOAs, so they can, anybody can learn about from them. That's one project that could be implemented in 3 years, perhaps. So you have all the knowledge of Americas in one system. So the questions that she has of the projects and the regulations and everything could be answered by an AI machine.
Would you like to add anything, Namir?
For me, it's knowledge mobilization. That's the best thing that could be achieved in that time, is that nobody has all the answers. This is a very nascent and fast developing arena that we all need to share as much information as possible. What are the best practices, what works, what doesn't work. I would go as far as I think with like-minded economies is to develop living labs to try to think of how do I implement some of the things. What would AI look in manufacturing, and what would that, test it, give it some kind of more of a life rather than theoretical sort of approach on this. That will give you ultimately the notion of what works, what doesn't, and what regulation and governance should look like in that afterwards.
Well, please, the next question.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for this panel. My name's Brian Ellsworth. I'm a communications advisor, and I also write a weekly newsletter about trends in AI in Latin America. I wanted to ask about one of the big areas I think that in a regulatory sense hangs over AI, which is copyright. And the phrase that really stuck with me was when Mr. Morales said we don't get to decide the rules. I think that's what you said. I think that's really true in the area of copyright, and what this even means to own a song today is completely different from what it meant even a year ago. I know there's a very vibrant debate around this in Brazil, but particularly when it comes to music, that's such an important cultural asset in Latin America, and it's now almost like nobody even knows whose it is anymore. What should regulators in the region, what kinds of things can they do about this? How should they approach this? And I'm almost reluctant to ask what to do because I'm not sure anyone knows. But what are the interesting conversations you're hearing about how to approach this? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a stab at answering. Copyright is certainly going to be a really complicated area, but it always has been. I remember years ago I was struggling with the Orphan Rights Act way back when, with respect to just all the different creators, not only songwriters, but artists, the fashion industry, et cetera. And so I think one way forward, not an answer to the question, would be to sort of have these dialogues with actual artists themselves, bring them in, and hear from them what they're experiencing in terms of what we do moving forward with it. But it is going to be very, very complex because, as you know, many times IP, different countries have just different sort of high-level theories about it, what ownership means and who owns things. And so I think that'll definitely be a hurdle to navigate.
Would anybody else like to add to Cheryl's answer? If not, okay, we will take all of the questions from the people standing, and that will conclude our panel. So please proceed. Next
Good
question.
afternoon. Good afternoon. It was a great panel. Congratulations. I'm going to use it for my classes. I am Professor Guerrero Cusumano. I teach at Georgetown University School of Business. And the first question, I will try to make it short, was inspired by Mr. Anani, that you talk about international standards. It seems to be that at this moment there are many aspirational standards in the world that perhaps it doesn't have the connotation to be applied in reality. It seems to be it's the same thing that happened 20 years ago with social accountability or social responsibility. I know in social accountability or responsibility that we tried to define a standard and we couldn't. And one of the things that they forgot was the culture of the country in which where artificial intelligence is used. All the data 2025, we have countries like India, 92% of the time are using artificial intelligence, with respect to Netherlands, 43%. Canada uses 50% of the time. So the question is there any standard that you had been exposed to that somehow motivates or influences in your organization? Something that you remember. And second question, very quickly, is I want to check with the Santiago Declaration. In 2023, there was an artificial intelligence Santiago de Chile Declaration, in which there was the idea in which way we could work with Latin America. I don't know if any of you could give an update about that. Thank you.
That's a very difficult question. I think maybe let's try to answer that maybe after we finish, maybe individually, I think. Let's give the panelists a little bit of time to think about that, but thank you. Next question, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the panel. My name is Tiago Pierobon. I am an associate staff before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and an adjunct professor at American University Washington College of Law. Well, I am particularly interested in the use of AI-based systems for the risk assessment of violent behaviors by the criminal justice system. So on this specific topic, I would have two interconnected questions. One, how can we ensure transparency and auditability in these systems, especially considering that they usually developed by private companies and quite often operate as a black box? And second, what should be the ethical and legal standards for the use of these systems, especially considering the risk of racial discrimination? Thank you.
Sure, please. Good question. I see. Okay, so we're going to ask everybody to ask a question, and then we'll have the panelists try to answer all the questions. Okay, this is good. New model. Thank you. Next question, please.
Great, thanks. Catalina Gonzalez, assistant professor at George Mason University. I'm from UPADI. I want to pick on Cheryl's comment on we have to think about AI in layers, right? Because the rapid advancement of AI depends on data centers, which depends on energy and water. And taking on that comment on that this rapid pace of change is the one that creates this governance gap. So I want to pick your brains into what are your thoughts into governance of AI as it connects to energy, as it connects to natural resources, especially since in decades to come, where we'll see changes and access to water and access to energy are not going to be important only for the AI, let's say gold rush, but also for the sustainable development of our communities and our well-being, in the future and in the next century. And I think this is not only relevant here in the US, but in Latin America, where our weather and climate is also going to change. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. Ari Herrera. I am the representative of the Pan American Federation of Engineering Organizations, one of the strategic partners of the OAS. And I just want to start by saying congratulations to Mrs. Osborne, Secretary, and the members that put this together. I don't know how you guys do it, but this is amazing. And I just wanted to pick up what Professor Charles mentioned about the future is for the most connected. And UPADI, I think you guys have heard me introduce UPADI as the equivalent of the OAS. It's an organization that agglomerates and represents all of the different engineering disciplines from the American continent. And I would like to just pick up on the proposal, because we are set up as the engineering community in the continent to really work under the leadership and coordination with the OAS to really at least give it a run to what Professor Charles is proposing. So I would like to follow up with the Secretariat and the members here to just say that UPADI would like to really explore and work on a pilot and arrange follow-up meeting with Dr. Charles to collaborate and see how we proceed. Thank you.
Wonderful. Seems like these panelists would like to start answering questions. Cheryl?
Sure. So I'll try to take a stab at all of them, especially since Georgetown's my alma mater, so I cannot let your question go unanswered, but it was a very good question. I don't think I would point to one specific standard. I mean, with respect to, the different safety, ethical concerns, but I would point you to the NIST grouping of standards that's come out. I think that that's an important tool, and I think that you can call a lot from that. With respect to the structure regarding criminalization, et cetera, it sounds like there is more data and input that is needed. There are so many different laws across the world, that impact that. It almost seems like there would need to be a structure in place in order to kind of pull in the proper data to be able to start to make decisions. Because without data, we can't really make good decisions, right, if we don't have the right data. And with respect to governance on AI, with respect to energy, so AI is, it's a little bit like a mushroom, right? It has touched on so many different areas, and I think when I speak about collaboration, that's where more collaboration does need to come in. So with respect to energy, there need to be conversations with AI technical experts as well as energy experts. I do think some of this is happening at the OECD. They have a lot of different working groups that are looking at, for example, AI in education, AI in energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think understanding where the touch points for those happen are going to be important. And of course, again, it's the data that's going to be very important, because the energy needs of every different region, country, et cetera, it's so different. So really having, I don't want to say a database, but just a way to be able to understand the differences in that as we're making our effort to deploy would be important. Thank you.
Quickly, regarding the laws, I think it's important to everybody to remember the categorical imperatives of Immanuel Kant. I think it's important not only for the practitioners, the users, but more importantly, for the computer scientists who develop the systems, and also the persons or the people who order the system, and to make the test, the system is performing accordingly with these principles. I don't think it will be really difficult to list all the nodes that the assistant could have. Thank you.
I think I'll give the technical version of I don't know to all those answers. I think in the end, in all these different sectors, it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's a multi-stakeholder conversation that needs to be had, because one thing is when you approach it as a policymaker, top down, and the other thing is when you go into the nitty-gritty details of how policy could affect some of these things. Panama, in the energy side, for example, we are a carbon neutral, carbon negative country, so that's something we got going for ourselves, and a lot of our energy production is renewable, so we think this is an opportunity. However, we need to think in terms of sustainable resource usage, I guess. It's not about not doing it, it's about how do we do it sustainably, because otherwise, when you look at developed nations are playing in very dirty industries and very resource intensive industries. And this is part of what makes them competitive as well, right? So I think as countries in the Americas, we need to look at, okay, how can we go in, but still go in sustainably? How can we do it? And then how can we balance our participation in this industry, rather than saying, let's not go in there just because this is, if we don't go in there, we're not going to be competitive, and that brings other societal challenges. But to the justice system, to the energy system, I think it's just a multi-stakeholder dialogue that we need to have, and testing, coming back, testing, coming back, testing, coming back. Because the other thing is we don't want to set rules that will push the industry out of our countries. They'll go to the next country, and that gives them better conditions. So we want for it actually to be a conversation in terms of how can we do this that in a way that is good for you, it's good for us, it's sustainable. So that's my technical version of I don't know, I guess.
Sure, I will try to quickly answer a couple of these. I think when we talk about standards, there's standards and then there's norms. And so when I talk about standards, I'm really talking about kind of the technical standards that companies are leveraging either to manage risk or to build products in a way that allows them to be interoperable across borders. I do think more broadly, something that Cheryl mentioned, I think right at the beginning, was the 2019 OECD AI principles. And those I do find to be a really good foundation for, a series of things that countries across the board have agreed to, and that I think lay a good foundation for some of these follow-on conversations specific to, human-centric approaches to fostering transparency, to mitigating bias. And so I think that's a starting point. Again, it's not a specific technical standard, but I do think it is a baseline kind of set of things that different countries have agreed to and are committed to seeing in practice. Related to, I think, the question around AI systems in law enforcement, I mean, this kind of goes back to my initial point on risk. And so I do think, there is a role for government here in assessing and then working with stakeholders to better understand kind of where are these systems being deployed, how are they being deployed, and what risk level do they present in that deployment context. I mean, the EU, for example, you mentioned the tiered risk system where there are some use cases that are entirely prohibited, some that just require additional oversight. And so I think in that context, perhaps in a law enforcement setting, there is a risk that needs to be addressed. And so that's something that maybe governments are working or should be looking at. But I think it is really an ongoing conversation, and depending on where you're at, there are different legal instruments in place to already address those risks. So kind of depends on where you're operating, and then also what regimes you have in place already. On AI and energy, I mean, this is an area that I am not specifically working on, but we do have an entire team in our organization that are looking at some of these intersections, so certainly happy to follow up with you specifically on that front. But I do think, as others have noted, this is an increasing area of conversation, and one that I think is going to continue to be a really, really important discussion to have. I mean, it was I live in Virginia. It was a key topic of the Virginia elections earlier this month. So, certainly something that I think is important for us to be thinking about.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the energy aspect. I mean, it's a great question. So AI can certainly help in its models of determining weather patterns, but also figure out the mix of energy between renewable and fossil type energy and aspect. But at the same time, the AI compute or the infrastructure, that it's the data centers, are heavy consumers of energy. And that's part of the challenge that we're facing in Canada. Although we have a lot of fossil energy that we can use, we're trying to look of how do we develop sustainable capabilities into this. Whether renewable, we're looking at small modular reactors, so this nuclear is not, it's green, but it's not renewable. However, there is a potential for that. We're looking at green hydrogen that is developed through renewable energy to try to use as fuel cells to, again, power. And some northern communities are actually using some of the energy that is generated by the data centers to heat some of the homes as well. Given that, the estimates, and I think it's mentioned at high level, is that data centers can consume up to 50 megawatts of energy. That's approximately the size of a small city for 50,000 people. So there's a lot of discussion to be done in terms of how to manage that. On the standards, criminality aspect is something, I think, in the absence of regulation, as I mentioned earlier, I think a code of conduct, at least that's what we're developing or instilling in Canada, is that our companies adopting that, whether in the health sector, it could be in the criminality, data and others. So then you have a better measure of, in terms of, is that data or the black box or the company that's managing it, are they transparent? Are they doing some stress testing, understanding, are they accountable for any mismanagement? Are they accountable for biases on that? But I think that's the type of concept that should be developed and, ahead of potentially getting into the development of AI regulations. Start with the bridge, the early concepts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to each and every one of the panelists for your thoughtful comments, as well as the thoughtful answers to the audience, for the audience's questions. And I'd also like to express appreciation to the audience here today for your engagement and for stimulating the conversation. I hope it is just the beginning of further collaborations hosted, and we'd like to thank the host, OAS. And I hope that we all leave with renewed inspiration, ideas and inspiration for a brighter future where AI is progressing equitably and sustainably for the benefit of all the Americas. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much to our panelists. Thank you very much, Suji. I apologize for changing the format of but we were running a little bit behind. And I am very pleased to offer the floor now to our Assistant Secretary General, Her Excellency Laurel Hill, who will provide closing remarks. Thank you, Ambassador. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm trying to gauge the age of this audience because I will start with this sentence. I am sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. And that's what Hall said in 1968. And since home video systems became available, my father and I have developed one of those tacitly established rituals in a family. Every single year around Thanksgiving, we watch Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. I have seen it so many times that I have Hal's voice in my head. Calm, polite, terrifying. And when I was younger, Hall embodied science fiction. And today, Hall turned into a prophecy. I do not frighten easily, not in politics, not in life, and certainly not in diplomacy. But artificial intelligence does scare me. I fear the ethics, I fear the geopolitics. Yet, what stays with me from Kubrick's movie is not only Hall's coldness, it is also the fragile, beautiful persistence of human curiosity, the instinct that makes us explore, question, and continue dreaming. Stephen Hawking warned that artificial intelligence could be the best or the worst thing that ever happens to humanity. And today, we all sense that AI challenges the very notions of humanity and power. For the first time, machines are not only calculating, they are reasoning, creating, deciding, and replacing us. And the question for me is one and one only. Who decides what kind of humanity we want AI help us build? So, good afternoon. It has been a fantastic panel, very, very educational. Allow me to begin by expressing my warmest appreciation to Mrs. Kim Osborne, Executive Secretary for Integral Development, and to her team at SETI for convening this essential and timely dialogue. And I also like to thank Albert Ramdin, our Secretary General, for remarks that emphasize the need for inter-American cooperation. And to all the panelists whose insights have illuminated today's discussion. And to each of you, representatives of our member states, observers, academia, private sector, and civil society, Thank you for engaging in this conversation that reaches the very heart of our shared humanity. In 2025, we have witnessed extraordinary breakthroughs. GPT-5 brought reasoning and planning into mainstream systems. Robotics has merged with AI. In China, autonomous robots have already played a complete soccer match without human input. Around the world, AI is diagnosing cancer, detecting fraud, drafting laws, choosing our partners, and composing music. And even here at the OAS, we have adopted AI for translation, and perhaps soon we will be adopting it for interpretation. So humanity, it is obvious, has crossed a threshold. I was educated believing that to be human meant to be intelligent. And that intelligence was the ability to be able to decide when to say please, when to say thank you, when to be sorry, and when to say I love you. And now we are told that that very intelligence, the intelligence I believe meant to be human, will be artificial. And so yes, I'm scared. What will happen when we begin to imitate compassion instead of feeling it? What will happen when machines will start killing each other and later learn to say, let's not kill each other? That's what one panelist said, defined as catastrophic risks. By then, will we humans have stopped killing one another? Will we care more about the death of machines than that of human beings? Or will we have forgotten what those words actually mean? If intelligence becomes detached from consciousness, we risk creating a civilization that knows everything except how to care. And connection without consciousness is not love, it is imitation. Neurosciences tell us that constant exposure to generative models reshapes attention, alters emotions, and weakens memory. MIT recently found a 47% drop in brain activity when people wrote with ChatGPT instead of unaided. AI governance is therefore not a technological issue. It is a matter of mental health and cognitive freedom. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han reminded us that power in our century was shifted from physical control to psychological influence. Domination is now achieved not through fear, but through seduction, the promise of convenience. We cannot allow the instruments that serve us to erode our capacity to feel, to connect, and to think. What must endure in this new world is what cannot be replicated: to consciousness, empathy, and wonder. And this is what we must protect as we embrace artificial intelligence through ethics, governance, and public policy grounded in human rights. So how can the Organization of American States guide our member states through this new frontier? How can we ensure that artificial intelligence serves our hemisphere rather than master it, or worse, become a tool for others to dominate it. Our own SETI data reveal a striking imbalance. Latin America and the Caribbean account for 20% of global AI application downloads, yet generate barely 1% of AI innovation and investment, and are projected to receive only 3% of its economic benefits by 2030. This is not a technological gap only. It is a geopolitical one. A region that consumes innovation without shaping it risks surrendering its sovereignty over the future. At the OAS, we've done some things, but there's still so much more to do. So let me begin by saying what we have done. It is clear that the region is entering a new phase of digital maturity. Uruguay, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Ecuador, and Mexico lead with national strategies and ethical frameworks aligned with UNESCO and OECD principles. Guatemala and Panama are developing participatory strategies, while Paraguay, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica integrate AI into innovation and digital education. In the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad, Tobago, and the Bahamas advance governance and literacy through CARICOM, the EU LAC Digital Alliance, and the Caribbean AI Task Force. So, AI is already transforming key sectors: health, education, agriculture, justice, and public services in our region. But the structural challenges continue to constrain the regional digital ecosystem. Infrastructure and connectivity gaps, a shortage of specialized talents, limited investment in research, development, and innovation, and the absence of harmonized ethical frameworks. So, how has the region responded? At the 7th meeting of ministers and high authorities of science and technology in 2024, ministers adopted the Declaration and Plan of Action towards the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and deployment of artificial intelligence in the Americas. That milestone reaffirmed a hemispheric vision to ensure that AI is developed in ways that are safe, secure, trustworthy, and human-centered. It calls on states to build governance frameworks, strengthen capacities, and foster partnerships that balance innovation with democracy and human rights. The plan created 2 working groups and reinforced the OAS Youth Academy on Transformative Technologies and the network of OAS Centers of Excellence. Together, those mandates position the OAS as a hemispheric platform for an inter-American AI agenda grounded in ethics, inclusion, and sustainable development. So now, is this enough? From where I'm sitting, I believe it is not. Our region has been a pioneer in norm setting and standard setting, and we are lagging behind. Perhaps it is time to envision an inter-American charter on ethical principles for artificial intelligence, a moral compass for government businesses, and citizens navigating this new terrain of power. The Americas can lead once again, proving that technology can be governed by conscience, not by chaos. And when I say we're lagging behind, it is so. In 2019, OECD developed standards. Some of you referred to the OECD. The Association of Southeastern Nations, ASEAN, has developed a governance framework. The UNESCO is now discussing a governance framework. In 2024, the European Union adopted an act with force of law on governance of artificial intelligence. So, this organization was built to defend rights, and now AI must become part of that defense. We all know that AI can replicate injustice or repair it, and it can marginalize or empower. And the choice lies in how we build and deploy it. For women, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant communities, migrants, and persons with disabilities, AI must be a path to participation, not a form of exclusion. Inclusion, diversity, and accessibility are non-negotiable principles of our hemispheric digital agenda. So, if we govern AI wisely, our children will grow up not learning replacement, but believing in renewal, in a world where technology amplifies their humanity instead of erasing it. So, when I'm scared, I think that AI can generate images, but cannot see beauty, and that it can write poems, but cannot feel them, and that it can simulate our voices, but cannot give them meaning. Our tasks as diplomats, as scientists, and as citizens is to ensure that human intelligence remains the heart of artificial intelligence. And so I began with the confession of my fears, and I will end the same way. So in preparation for this talk, I asked AI what I should be saying to you. So this is what it first, this is what it first showed me. And then, and this, I asked, dear Chat GPT, because I learned from colleagues that you always say please to Chat GPT, and you treat it as if it were a human being. So I asked, dear Chat GPT, I am Laura Gill, OAS Assistant Secretary General. I have been invited to this event. I attach. In one paragraph, I would like to convey to this expert audience the critical responsibility that we have towards AI. I also want to impress them. What will I have to say? And then the answer is, as we stand at the threshold of an age defined by artificial intelligence, our responsibility is nothing less than to ensure that technology reflects the very value that define our democracies. AI must not become an instrument that concentrates power or deepens inequality, but rather a catalyst for inclusion, ethical progress, and share prosperity across the Americas. Our challenge is to govern with foresight, to balance innovation with accountability, speed with reflection, and capability with conscience. The decisions we make today will shape whether AI strengthens or weakens the social contract that binds our hemisphere, and that is the true measure of our leadership. So, it sounded intelligent, right? It said what we wanted to hear, right? But it doesn't say what we need to do to be a little less politically correct and more human. So, AI is here, and it is here to stay, and our responsibility is to make sure, as Hawkins urged, that we employ best practices, manage consequences, and lead with foresight. In the end, and allow me to go back to the basics, an algorithm cannot replace courage. An algorithm cannot replace the voice that dares to question power. And if you don't trust me, go and ask AI and you see what it tells you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Assistant Secretary General, for a very fitting conclusion to what was an exciting and interesting dialogue. Thank you for challenging us. I believe there is a lot that can be done within the context of the OAS, within the context of our member states. And yes, perhaps the charter might be a way to go. We have lots of different charters that have worked successfully for us as instruments, and that's something to be considered. So again, my thanks to our panelists. If I could get one more round of applause for our moderator and our panelists. On behalf of the Secretariat for Integral Development, on behalf of the team, I especially want to recognize the efforts of the team. I always say we only do this because we have an amazing team in SETI, Cesar Parga, Ariane Quintal, who has been working on this. Ariane, where are you? I want you to stand and take a bow. Thank you so much for all the logistical work that you've done on this. Thank you so much. The conversation continues. I very much like the phrase that the future belongs to the most connected. And so the question for each of us is whether we are government, private sector, academia, how connected are we? How connected do we want to be? How do we want to engage with this technology? It is here. It isn't going away. At the OAS, at SETI, we will continue to pursue the mandate that we've been given. We have a compendium of good practices that we are putting together so that we can share with our member states. We are working on the model governance system that we've been mandated to do by our ministers of science and technology. And we hope that working collectively, working collaboratively with our partners across academia, the private sector, industry, civil society, importantly our civil society head is here, that we together, we can build truly an Americas where we are, where it's human-centered, that as our ASG says, that does not ignore human intelligence, but capitalizes on human intelligence and advocates for human intelligence, equality, and prosperity for all of our people. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.